My fiancée went on a girls' night, then but dialed me while she was trashing my proposal to another guy. I listened for 15 minutes. I didn't interrupt. I just texted her friend in the same group. Put her on speakerphone for me. The sudden silence on the other end was golden. I came home to a packed suitcase on the porch. I, 29M, thought I knew the woman I was about to marry. 3 years together, 6 months engaged, wedding planned for next spring. I thought we were solid. I thought she loved me. I was wrong about a lot of things. Last Friday night, she announced she was going out for girls' night with her college friends. Nothing unusual there. She did this maybe once a month. I told her to have fun, gave her a kiss, and settled in to watch some Netflix with a beer. Normal Friday night for me. Around 10 p.m., my phone buzzed. Her name on the screen. I smiled, figuring she was calling to check in or maybe needed me to pick her up later. I answered, but instead of her voice directed at me, I heard background noise, music, laughter, the clinking of glasses. She had but dialed me. I was about to hang up when I heard her voice, clear as day, talking to someone. At first, I thought maybe she'd notice and we'd laugh about it later. But then I heard what she was actually saying. She was talking about our engagement. About me. And none of it was good. She told whoever she was with that the proposal was pathetic. That I had taken her to the same restaurant where we had our first date, got down on one knee right there at the table, and how embarrassing it was. She said the ring was smaller than she'd expected, that she'd had to fake her excitement because people were watching. She called me predictable, boring, safe. My stomach dropped. I remembered that night 2 months ago. How nervous I'd been. How I'd thought the sentimental location would be perfect. How her eyes had lit up when I got down on one knee. How she'd said yes with tears in her eyes. Apparently, those were tears of disappointment, not joy. But she wasn't done. She started talking about this guy from her work, someone I'd met a few times at company events. She described how much more exciting he was, how he made her feel alive in ways I never did. She said she'd been thinking about him more and more lately, especially after we got engaged. She wondered out loud if she was settling for me because I was stable and would make a good husband, even though the passion wasn't there. I sat there in my living room, beer forgotten, listening to the woman I loved tear apart everything I thought we had. She talked about how I was too predictable in bed, how I never surprised her anymore, how she sometimes fantasized about what life would be like with someone more spontaneous. 15 minutes. I listened for 15 agonizing minutes as she systematically destroyed every good memory I had of our relationship. She made jokes about my quirks that I thought she found endearing. She mocked the way I planned our dates, always asking what she wanted to do instead of just taking charge. She said I was more like a roommate than a lover. The worst part was hearing her friends agree with her. These women I'd hosted at dinner parties, who I'd thought liked me. They were encouraging her to explore her feelings for this other guy, telling her that marriage was a big step and she shouldn't rush into it if she wasn't sure. By the time she started talking about whether she should break up with me before or after the wedding, I'd heard enough. But instead of hanging up or calling her out right then, something cold and calculating settled over me. I opened my contacts and found her friend Sarah, who I knew was part of this group. Sarah had always been friendly to me, had even helped me plan a surprise birthday party for my fiancée last year. I sent her a simple text. Put her on speakerphone for me. The response was immediate. The background chatter on the call stopped dead. I could practically hear the panic through the phone. Someone, probably Sarah, was frantically trying to get my fiancé's attention. I heard my name being whispered urgently. Then, finally, my fiancé's voice, shaky and uncertain. Hello? Are you there? I let the silence stretch for a few seconds. Then I simply said that I'd heard everything, and I'd see her at home. I hung up. I didn't move from the couch for an hour. I just sat there, processing everything I'd learned. The woman I'd planned to spend my life with thought I was boring, predictable, and a consolation prize. She was already emotionally involved with someone else. She'd been faking her happiness about our engagement. But the shock was wearing off, and in its place was something sharper. Anger. Not just at her betrayal, but at how stupid I felt. All those times I'd noticed her being distant lately, how she'd started working late more often, how she'd been less affectionate. I'd attributed it to wedding stress. I'd been so naive. I started thinking practically. We lived together in my apartment. Most of the furniture was mine from before she moved in. The wedding deposits were in my name. I'd been the one pushing for us to get a joint bank account, which thankfully we'd never gotten around to opening. By the time I heard her key in the lock 2 hours later, I'd made my decision. She came in looking like she'd been crying, mascara smudged, her usual post-night out confidence completely gone. She started apologizing immediately, saying it wasn't what I thought, that she'd had too much to drink, that she didn't mean any of it. I told her to stop. I said I'd heard enough to know exactly what she meant, and that she'd done me a favor by being honest when she thought I couldn't hear it. I told her I was grateful, actually, because now I knew who she really was before I married her. She tried to argue, tried to say it was just girl talk, that everyone complains sometimes. She said she loved me, that she wanted to work things out. I asked her if she could honestly say she'd never thought about the co-worker she'd mentioned. The silence told me everything I needed to know. I told her she had until morning to pack her things and leave. I said I'd keep the ring since she clearly didn't appreciate it anyway, and I'd handle canceling the wedding. I was calm, matter-of-fact about it. I think that scared her more than if I'd yelled. She spent the night in our guest room, and I could hear her crying through the walls. Part of me felt bad. Part of me wanted to comfort her like I always had. But every time I started to soften, I remembered her laughing about how pathetic my proposal was. The next morning, I woke up to find her gone. Her suitcase was on the porch with a note apologizing again and asking me to call her when I was ready to talk. I wasn't ready to talk. I might never be ready to talk. Update 1. It's been a week since everything went down, and I'm honestly doing better than I expected. The first few days were rough. I kept finding little reminders of her everywhere, kept expecting her to walk through the door. But then I started to notice something interesting. My apartment felt peaceful. I realized I'd been walking on eggshells for months without even knowing it. Always trying to be what I thought she wanted, always second-guessing whether she was happy with me. Now that I knew the truth, the constant low-level anxiety was gone. She's been texting me constantly. At first, it was apologies and pleas to talk. When I didn't respond, they turned angry. She accused me of throwing away 3 years over one conversation, said I was being childish and unforgiving. She claimed she was just venting and that all couples had doubts sometimes. Yesterday, the texts took a different turn. She said she'd ended things with the coworker, that she realized she'd made a mistake, that she wanted to fight for us. She said she understood now how much she'd hurt me and that she was willing to do whatever it took to make it right. I almost responded to that one. Almost. But then I remembered something else from that phone call that I hadn't mentioned before. After she'd finished trashing our relationship, she'd started talking about the wedding itself. How she was dreading having to pretend to be happy on what should be the best day of her life. How she was hoping something would happen to give her an excuse to call it off. Well, she got her wish. I've started the process of canceling everything. The venue was surprisingly understanding when I explained there had been a change in circumstances. Most vendors had clauses for this kind of thing. I'm out some money, but not as much as I'd feared. The hardest part was calling my family. My mom cried. My dad just said he was proud of me for standing up for myself. My little sister asked if she could have the bridesmaid dress money to go toward a vacation instead. I love my family. Her family has been trying to reach me too. Her mother called yesterday, crying, begging me to reconsider. She said her daughter was devastated and that everyone makes mistakes. I told her gently that this wasn't a mistake. It was a revelation of who her daughter really was when she thought no one was listening. The weird thing is, I'm sleeping better now than I have in months. I'm eating better too. It's like my body knew something was wrong before my brain caught up. Update 2. 2 weeks post-breakup, and the drama has escalated in ways I never expected. My ex showed up at my work Monday. Security called me down to the lobby where she was making a scene, demanding to see me. She looked terrible, like she hadn't been sleeping or taking care of herself. She was crying, saying she needed to explain everything, that I was ruining both our lives by being stubborn. I agreed to talk to her, but only in the lobby with security nearby. She told me the whole story then, about how she'd been having an emotional affair with her coworker for 2 months, how it had never gotten physical, but how he made her feel exciting and desired in ways she'd forgotten were possible. She said she'd been trying to figure out how to break up with me without hurting me, and that's why she'd been distant. She swore the night I overheard her was the first time she'd ever talked about it with anyone. She said her friends had been encouraging her to be honest with me instead of leading me on. She claimed she'd realized that night, after hearing herself say those things out loud, that she didn't want to lose me. I asked her why she'd said yes when I proposed if she was already having doubts. She said she panicked, that I looked so hopeful and everyone was watching, and she couldn't bear to hurt me in public like that. So instead, she'd planned to hurt me privately later. How considerate. She begged me to go to couples counseling. She said she'd quit her job to get away from the coworker. She said she'd do anything to prove she was serious about us. I told her the problem wasn't just the emotional affair. It was that she'd been lying to me for months about who she was and how she felt. I told her I couldn't marry someone who found me boring and predictable, someone who had to fake enthusiasm about spending her life with me. She got angry then, said I was being unreasonable, that people change and grow, and she was trying to be honest now. She accused me of being too proud to forgive, of punishing her for being human. I told her she was right about one thing. I was proud. Too proud to marry someone who settled for me. Too proud to spend my life wondering if I was enough. Security had to escort her out when she wouldn't leave. That evening, I got a call from the coworker himself. That was a surprise. He said she'd been harassing him at work since our breakup, showing up at his desk crying, calling him at all hours. He wanted me to know that he'd never encouraged her feelings and that he was considering reporting her to HR. He also told me something interesting. According to him, she'd been talking about breaking up with me for months, long before that girls' night. She'd told him she was just waiting for the right moment, that she felt trapped because we'd already sent save the dates. So much for it being a moment of doubt caused by too much wine. I thanked him for the information and suggested he document everything in case he needed to file a complaint. Update 3. It's been a month now, and I finally feel like I can see the whole picture clearly. My ex escalated her behavior after the work incident. She started showing up at places she knew I'd be, my gym, my favorite coffee shop, the grocery store I always went to. She tried to corner me into conversations about how we could fix things. I finally had to send her a formal cease and desist letter through a lawyer friend. That seemed to get through to her, because the stalking stopped. But the real revelation came from an unexpected source. Sarah, the friend who'd been there that night, reached out to me last week. She asked if we could meet for coffee because she had things to tell me that she thought I deserved to know. Turns out, my ex had been planning this breakup for a lot longer than anyone realized. Sarah told me that she'd been complaining about me for over a year, long before the coworker entered the picture. She'd been saying I was too nice, too accommodating, that she felt like she was dating a golden retriever instead of a man. Sarah said they'd all been encouraging her to break up with me instead of stringing me along, but she kept making excuses. She said she loved the stability I provided, that I took good care of her, that I'd make a good father someday. But she wasn't attracted to me anymore and hadn't been for a long time. The engagement had been her last-ditch attempt to convince herself she could be happy with safe. When that didn't work, she'd started looking elsewhere for excitement. Sarah apologized for not saying anything sooner. She said she'd assumed I knew on some level that things weren't right between us. She said she was sorry for what happened that night, but that maybe it was better I found out before the wedding. She was right. I thanked her for her honesty and told her I held no hard feelings toward her or the other friends. They hadn't betrayed me. They'd just been honest with someone they thought was being honest with them. The hardest part of this whole thing hasn't been losing my fiancée. It's been realizing how long I'd been lying to myself about the state of our relationship. All those times I'd noticed her being distant or uninterested, I'd made excuses. I'd convinced myself that all couples went through rough patches, that the spark would come back. I'd been so focused on being the perfect boyfriend, attentive, supportive, accommodating, that I'd forgotten to be myself. And maybe that version of me, the one so desperate to please, really was boring. I've started going to therapy to work through some of this. My therapist helped me see that I'd been so afraid of conflict or disappointment that I'd lost myself in the relationship. I'd become exactly what she'd accused me of being, predictable and safe to the point of being invisible. The good news is, I'm finding myself again. I've started rock climbing, something I'd always wanted to try but never mentioned because I didn't think she'd be interested. I've reconnected with old friends I'd drifted away from. I've even started dating again. Nothing serious, just coffee dates and casual conversations. And you know what? The women I'm meeting now seem to actually enjoy talking to me. They laugh at my jokes, they're curious about my thoughts and opinions, they don't look bored when I tell stories. It's a revelation. My ex sent me one final text last week. She said she was sorry for everything, that she hoped I'd find someone who appreciated me, and that she was starting therapy to work on herself. She said she understood now that the problem was never me. It was her fear of commitment and her need for constant validation from multiple sources. I appreciated the apology, but I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. I saw her at a mutual friend's birthday party last weekend. She looked good, healthier than when she'd shown up at my work. She nodded at me from across the room, but didn't approach. I heard from someone that she'd moved back in with her parents and was taking time to figure out what she wanted. As for me, I'm doing great. Really great. Better than I have in years, actually. That butt dial was the worst thing that ever happened to me. It saved me from a marriage that would have slowly killed everything I liked about myself. It saved me from wondering for years why my wife seemed increasingly dissatisfied with everything I did. It saved me from the eventual divorce that would have been inevitable once she stopped being able to fake contentment. Most importantly, it reminded me that I deserve someone who's genuinely excited about the prospect of building a life with me. Someone who thinks my predictability is reliability, my thoughtfulness is romantic, my steadiness is strength. Someone who would never, ever describe my proposal as pathetic. I'm in no rush to find that person, but I'm optimistic that I will. And when I do, I'll know the difference between someone who loves me and someone who's settling for me. Because now I know what both sound like.